Hello everyone, welcome back and thank you for joining me for yet another video. If this is your first time joining us, I really hope that you learn something from this and that this benefits you in some way. So let's get started. Today we're going to be calibrating the AVC that is in the Spectrum radios. The instruction manuals do go over this, but it is kind of difficult to follow, and in some cases it's not all that helpful. So I hope this video will help you out more when we're talking about calibrating those AVCs. So this is the arm of felony, and this is the model that we're going to be doing the calibration on. The first thing that you'll need to do is remove the 4 screws from the receiver box. You'll notice that I have already done that here in the effort of saving time. But in this model, those 4 screws are 1, 2, there's one under the cable, and then one under the servo arm. Once those are removed, you can remove the cover for the receiver box. Now located underneath is your receiver. I'm not sure you can hear this, but we'll give it a try. There is a button located on your receiver that will place your receiver into bind mode. On the transmitter, you'll also notice that there is a bind button located here, as well as a power button here. Now, not all transmitters have the same buttons or the same binding processes, but for demonstrations, we're going to use this one. Now, I've shown you this because binding is required to go into the calibration mode for your AVC, which means every time that you bind your receiver to a new transmitter, you are going to have to calibrate that AVC, and that means that you'll do that in your binding process. Additionally, once your binding is complete, it will not allow you to operate the throttle in that configuration, so you'll definitely want to do the calibration regardless. Now you'll notice that I have already plugged in my batteries in preparation for this process. So what we'll do from here is we will press and hold this button on the receiver and power on the speed controller. Once that light begins blinking, you can let go of that button. Then we'll go to our transmitter and hold the bind button and power on the transmitter. Once that LED starts to flash, you can let go of that bind button. And you'll notice that the steering just centered up, and that's indicating that the bind process is successful. Now from here, the instructions will tell you to pull full throttle, push full reverse, turn full left, and turn full right, and power off the system. Now, as a tip for you here, you'll notice that that speed controller does beep in quite a number of beeps. That is counting the number of cells that it sees. So this is a good idea to keep in mind when you're talking about checking for batteries and checking for LiPo settings. So if you only get 5 beeps and you know you're running a 6 cell, that's telling you that you have a problem with the way that the ESC is seeing your batteries. Now, once that process is complete, you have the ability to test your system. So steering is working, also throttle is now working. Now you'll notice that when the AVC is on here, the AVC is correcting the steering. Now if you pay real close attention, you'll notice that this AVC is actually set up incorrectly. And that is because when we steer, or when we turn the vehicle, that steering is correcting into the slide instead of out of the slide. Now this is where the instruction manuals aren't all that helpful, because it doesn't tell you that to correct that problem, you need to rebind it, and you'll need to, instead of turning to the left first, you'll need to turn to the right first when you do that process. So let's power this off, and we'll do that again, and you can see how that works. Okay, so once again, we'll hold down the bind button. We'll power on the receiver. We'll come to our transmitter, hold down the bind button, power on the transmitter. All right, so now we'll do our calibration again. So full throttle, full reverse, but this time we'll turn to the right and to the left and power off the system. Now powering back on the system, going through the check of your battery again. Now we can verify that everything is working as expected, so steering. Now you'll notice that with these new receivers, you see that steering is not responding, and that's because you do have to give it a throttle pull. And now if you'll see, that steering is now correcting out of the slide. So that is the correct way to calibrate that AVC. Now, as I mentioned, the manual does go over this process, but I've not seen a lot of places where it does talk about which direction to turn your steering first for the calibration. So hopefully this will help you with the calibration of that speed controller. Now that that calibration is done, let's talk a little bit about adjusting the AVC. So if you look at your transmitter, you'll see that there is a knob that's located here. Now that knob is your steering rate for your AVC. By turning this knob all the way down and giving this another check here, you'll notice that that steering is not responding with that knob all the way down. Versus if we turn that knob all the way up, you'll see that now that is responding. So you can adjust this setting if your AVC is a little bit strong and you wanted to see a bit more slide or you wanted to pitch it out a bit harder. You can play with that value a little bit and adjust it down. Looking at a higher end controller, when we look at this screen right here, you can see that this controller actually offers you more adjustability. So you can get down here and adjust that steering gain by a matter of just 1 or 2 percentages at a time or a larger adjustment. Now, if you'll notice that there is a throttle gain in here. Now, there's a little known fact that the AVC actually pulls some of your throttle back when it initiates. And that is another safety measure to keep your car under control. So having a higher end controller like this will let you adjust the throttle gain separate of the steering gain. So you really have a finite amount of control when it talks about the AVC. Now this controller is not all that inexpensive, but there are some options in the $150 range at this time that you can get some of this adjustability. Now keep in mind, when you do bind that receiver to the new transmitter, you will have to run through that calibration mode again just to make sure that everything is properly set up. One final tip before we go. You may have noticed that when I was going through the calibration process, I had the vehicle lifted up on a car stand. And this is for multiple reasons. So number one, if something had gone wrong in the calibration mode, and when I pulled the throttle, the vehicle started running by itself. So that's a good protective measure to keep the car from running off of a counter, knocking things over, breaking stuff. So that's a great advantage to that. But also this stand that I have here happens to rotate. So when we're looking at checking the direction of your correction, that's another very helpful thing for you to get things calibrated correctly and get things set up so that you can have the most enjoyment out of your car. Well, that's it. That's going to wrap it up for this video. I appreciate you tagging along. If you benefited from it in any way, consider giving me a like and a subscription. Also, if you want to see notifications for future videos, make sure you hit that bell. That's true of all of your videos, all of your subscriptions rather. I've talked about this in previous videos. If you're not hitting that bell, you're not getting that notification. But anyway, I appreciate you tagging along for another video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.